The morning started like any other in Pine Ridge Estates, with the smell of fresh cut grass and the sound of sprinklers hitting the sidewalk. I was sitting on my porch with my golden retriever Max, enjoying my coffee and watching him play with his favorite tennis ball. That's when I saw her marching down the street, clipboard in hand, measuring tape swinging from her belt like a sheriff's badge. Karen Henderson, our HOA president, was on the prowl again. She stopped at the Johnsons' house first, pulling out her tape measure to check if their garden gnomes were the regulation 12 inches from the property line. Then she moved to the Martinez family's driveway, photographing what I assumed was an oil stain that was probably just water from washing their car. But I knew it was only a matter of time before she made her way to my house. Karen had been circling me like a shark for weeks, ever since I'd politely declined her invitation to join the HOA board. Max barked happily as a squirrel ran across the fence, and that's when Karen's head snapped in our direction. Her eyes narrowed behind her oversized sunglasses, and she changed course, making a beeline straight for my property. I could see her lips moving as she muttered to herself, probably already composing the violation notice in her head. Hey everyone, if you're enjoying this story about entitled HOA presidents getting what they deserve, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Karen Eat World for more tales of epic karma. We post news stories every week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next in this one. Excuse me, Karen called out before she'd even reached my property line. Is that a shock collar on your dog? She pointed her pen at Max like it was a weapon, her voice dripping with false concern. I looked down at Max's collar, a simple brown leather band with a small device attached. It was his AirTag collar, something I'd bought after he'd gotten out once during a thunderstorm. The tracking device gave me peace of mind, nothing more. It's not a shock collar, I explained calmly, calling Max over. It's just an AirTag holder so I can find him if he ever gets lost. Max wagged his tail as he approached, clearly happy and showing no signs of distress. But Karen wasn't listening. She was already taking photos with her phone, documenting what she perceived as animal abuse. I know a shock collar when I see one, she declared, not even bothering to look closer. Those devices are specifically prohibited under HOA Regulation 17.3, subsection B. Not to mention, I'm required by law to report animal cruelty to the authorities. She pulled out her phone again, this time appearing to dial a number. Yes, hello, Animal Control? I need to report a case of abuse at 472 Pine Ridge Drive. I tried to interject, even offered to show her the AirTag app on my phone, but she held up her hand to silence me while she continued her theatrical phone call. Max, oblivious to the drama, had gone back to chasing butterflies in the garden. Within 20 minutes, an animal control officer arrived, looking somewhat confused as he observed my clearly happy, healthy dog playing in the yard. The officer examined Max's collar, immediately recognizing it as a harmless tracking device. Ma'am, he said, turning to Karen, this is an AirTag collar. It's for GPS tracking, not shocking. This dog shows no signs of abuse whatsoever. Karen's face turned red, but instead of apologizing, she doubled down. Well, it looks like a shock collar, and appearances matter in this neighborhood. It's still a violation of HOA aesthetics. After the officer left, shaking his head at the waste of time, Karen served me with an official HOA violation notice. Not for animal abuse, since that had been disproven, but for displaying pet accessories that create a negative visual impact and could be mistaken for prohibited devices. The fine was $500, and I had 7 days to remove the collar or face additional penalties. I attended the next HOA meeting to contest the fine, bringing documentation about the AirTag collar, testimonials from neighbors who knew Max was well cared for, even a letter from our veterinarian. The board, which consisted of Karen and 4 of her hand-picked allies, dismissed everything. The rule is clear, Karen said, banging her gavel. Any device that could be perceived as harmful to animals is prohibited. Perception is reality in Pine Ridge Estates. That's when I decided enough was enough. Karen wanted to play games with perception and rules? Fine. I'd been patient, reasonable, trying to be a good neighbor. but she'd pushed too far. What she didn't know was that I hadn't retired early from my tech company just to sit around. I'd sold my startup for enough money to play Karen's game better than she ever could. I started with research, spending hours going through every HOA document, every meeting minute, every regulation she'd ever enacted. I hired a private investigator, completely legal of course, to look into Karen's background and her property holdings. What I found was interesting. Very interesting. Karen owned not just her house, but 3 rental properties in the neighborhood, all governed by the same HOA rules she enforced so zealously. The first thing I discovered was that Karen's rentals were all in violation of multiple HOA regulations she'd cited others for. Grass half an inch too long, mailboxes the wrong shade of black, house numbers in non-approved fonts. But more importantly, I found out about the empty lot. A small piece of land at the end of our street, the only access point to the community garden that Karen visited every single morning for her prized heirloom tomatoes. The lot had been for sale for years, priced too high for its size. The owner lived out of state and just wanted it gone. I made a cash offer 40% above asking price with one condition: immediate closing. Within 72 hours I owned the lot. But I didn't stop there. I also discovered that the community garden itself sat on land that was technically not owned by the HOA but leased from the city on a month-to-month basis. I formed an LLC called Pine Ridge Agricultural Development and approached the city with a proposal. I would lease the garden land for 5 times what the HOA was paying, with a 10-year commitment, and transform it into an educational urban farm that would donate produce to local food banks. The city council loved it. The lease transfer would take effect in 30 days. But the masterpiece of my plan involved Karen's interpretation of HOA rules about perceived violations. I hired a team of lawyers to draft a new neighborhood watch program focused on perception-based safety concerns. Using Karen's own logic that perception equals reality, I documented every single thing about her properties that could be perceived as violations or safety hazards. That shadow on her driveway that could be perceived as an oil stain. The way her bushes could be perceived as hiding spots for criminals. How her security cameras could be perceived as privacy violations for neighbors. Her wind chimes could be perceived as noise pollution. Her garden statues could be perceived as religious symbols, potentially offending neighbors of different faiths. Every single interpretation was based on precedents she had set with her own violations against others. I then purchased the house directly next to Karen's main residence, which had been on the market for months. The elderly couple selling it were delighted to get asking price in cash. I immediately installed security cameras, all perfectly legal and compliant, that happened to cover every inch of Karen's property from public view angles. I also installed motion-activated lights that were triggered by any movement, including cars passing by or leaves blowing in the wind. The crescendo came when I filed 73 HOA violations against Karen's properties simultaneously, each one using her own perception standard. The fines totaled over $40,000. But that wasn't the killing blow. No, that came when I exercised my right as the owner of the access lot to restrict passage. You see, Karen's beloved community garden, where she'd won 17 blue ribbons for her tomatoes, was now only accessible through my property. And while I couldn't ban her specifically, I could establish rules for crossing. Anyone wanting access had to sign a waiver acknowledging that they were being recorded, agree to a background check, and most importantly, admit in writing that perception-based violations are subjective and should not be grounds for HOA fines. The morning I installed the gate on my access lot, complete with security keypad and cameras, was the morning Karen realized what had happened. She stood at the barrier, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, reading the posted notice about the land lease transfer and the new access requirements. I watched from my porch as she pulled out her phone, presumably to call her lawyer, then stopped mid-dial. She looked at the official documents posted on the gate, then at the security cameras, then over at my house where I sat with Max, who was still wearing his AirTag collar. Her face went through a rainbow of colors, from red to purple to an almost ghostly white as the full scope hit her. Every single thing I'd done was completely legal. Every move was made using her own rules, her own precedents, her own interpretation of HOA regulations. She had 73 violations to contest with fines she'd have to pay since she'd established that exact standard. She'd lost access to the community garden both physically and soon legally. Her rental properties were under constant surveillance. And the cherry on top? The urban farm that would replace her garden would be run by a nonprofit I'd established called the Karen Henderson Memorial Fund for Agricultural Education, named after her with complete sincerity, of course. As she stood there, frozen in place, holding her clipboard that now seemed so small and powerless, her eyes met mine. In that moment, she understood. She'd created a monster with her petty rules and perception-based violations, and I'd simply fed it until it turned around and devoured her. The shock on her face was complete, absolute, the kind of recognition that comes when you realize you've been thoroughly, completely, and legally destroyed by your own weapon. Wow, what a story of sweet, sweet karma. If you enjoyed watching Karen get her just desserts, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to Karen Eat World. Ring the notification bell so you never miss our weekly uploads of entitled people getting exactly what they deserve. We've got tons more stories of HOA nightmares, entitled neighbors, and epic revenge coming your way. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the best revenge is perfectly legal. See you in the next video.